In this tutorial, we'll demonstrate how to schedule 2 individual providers using an example of 280 assessed monthly hours and a work week limit of 40 hours for each provider. We'll walk through scheduling for the months of February, March, and April to show how to adjust to months of different lengths. Before we start, let's review some key points. There are 2 types of hour limits to keep track of: the work week limit for each individual provider and your own authorized monthly hours. An individual provider's work week runs from Sunday, 12 a.m. to Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Individual providers hired after January 2016 have a work week limit of 40 hours. If you have questions about your provider's specific work week limit, ask your case manager for clarification. A work week can include hours from another month, different pay periods, and other clients your individual providers may work for. Okay, let's get started. Use a blank calendar for keeping track of hours. At the top of the calendar, write your total authorized monthly hours. This is how many hours you will divide between your 2 providers. Write each provider's name or initial followed by an equal sign for each day of the month. At the end of the week, in the box for Saturday, make room to add the weekly totals for each provider. Write in the hours for one provider at a time. In this scenario, one provider works the same 40 hours every week, with Saturdays and Sundays off. Next, write the total hours at the end of the week. Remember to include any hours from the month prior or following that overlap a work week for February. The weekly totals should equal 40 for this provider. Before scheduling the second provider, you'll want to calculate the remaining authorized hours. To do this, add up all the hours the first provider is scheduled to work. For this month, that total is 160 hours. Next, subtract 160 from your monthly total. This is the maximum number of hours the second provider can work this month. Schedule the second provider hours, starting with the weekends. Schedule the remaining workdays according to your needs and preferences and the availability of the provider. In this scenario, the second provider wants to take Wednesdays and Thursdays off. Keep to a regular schedule to ensure that you have coverage for the whole month. Double-check weekly totals for each provider. And finally, add the total hours worked by both providers to make sure they match your authorized hours for the whole month. Next up, March. At the top of the calendar, write your total authorized monthly hours. Fill in the hours for the first provider, which are the same as the previous month. 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Add the total weekly hours at the end of each week. Before scheduling the second provider, calculate the remaining authorized monthly hours. Since March is a longer month, the first provider will work 184 hours, leaving 96 hours for the second provider to schedule for the whole month. Schedule the second provider hours, starting with the weekends, to make sure you have your care hours filled on those days. Since there are more days of the month and fewer total hours, the second provider will work slightly fewer hours on their days than they did in February. Schedule the remaining work days according to your needs and preferences and the availability of the provider. Add up the weekly totals for the second provider at the end of each week. And again, check the monthly total to make sure it's within your authorized monthly limit. If the total is off, adjust the second provider's schedule since the first provider is already at their 40-hour work week limit. Next up, April. For April, the first provider wants to take some days off in addition to their regular weekends. Fill in the days they plan to work with their regular 8-hour days. Add their weekly totals at the end of the week. Before scheduling the second provider, calculate the remaining authorized monthly hours. Since the first provider is taking some days off, they will work 144 hours, leaving 136 hours for the second provider to schedule for the whole month. Schedule the second provider hours, starting with all the days that the first provider is taking off to make sure you have your care hours filled on those days. Schedule the remaining workdays according to your needs and preferences and the availability of the provider. Add up the weekly totals for the second provider at the end of each week. And again, check the monthly total to make sure it's within your authorized monthly limit. We hope this helps you understand how to schedule a month with 2 individual providers and keep track of their workweek limits. If needed, a calendar calculator tool is available for download on the Aging and Long-Term Support Administration website for you and each of your providers to use to track their individual schedules. Remember, planning ahead before each month helps you stay within your authorized monthly hours and your provider's workweek limit. If you have trouble getting started, contact your case manager for help.